All right, so I wanted to talk about some of the more recent archetypes and cards released in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I wanted to point out like what I think is good design and what is bad design, right? Where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going. I feel like when I look at chat and generally when I try to get a reading on people's opinions on Yu-Gi-Oh! As a card game, there's a lot of tunnel visioning and sports like groupthink mentality when it comes to like what is good, what is bad for the game in a holistic sense. And of course, I myself am, I'm a proponent of that too. You can see from just the recent video I made that I was extremely happy that Bestials were getting hit pre-release. Cards to be limited, they're gonna be cut down to 1 instantly? Wait, that's sick. Wait, that means I can play Sky Strikers. But I wanted to open up a discussion, right? In a more objective sense and try to figure out like, hey, what do we want to see in Yu-Gi-Oh! Moving forward? And what do we absolutely not want to see? Like, what is good design? What is bad design? Right? I want to know your thoughts about it too. But first, hear me out. And then we'll talk with some people in the chat and get their input, right? So what is good design, right? So I wanted to talk about some of the recent archetypes that came out. So that's going to include like Vernisylph, and all these archetypes I'm going to be saying right now, right, are archetypes that have recently kind of come out and they kind of elevate other archetypes, older archetypes, right? So Vernisylph, for example, they elevate older Earth archetypes and Madolches specifically, right? Madolches are Earth fairies, and Vernisylph can search for Earth fairies, they revive Earth monsters, and they have foolish burial effects specifically for Earth monsters. Sprites elevate older level 2 centric archetypes like Melfi, frogs, and Live Twin to elevate other things other than just themselves, right? You could play sprites, but you could also play Live Twin sprites. You could also play Melfi sprites, right? Another example is like Sword Soul, right? Sword Soul elevates the worm type, right? Which include Tenyi, Yangzing, right? So we see those cards come into play more with those. Labyrinth elevates trap cards as a whole, right? Which are pretty old and outdated as a card type, just given how like hand traps are so abundant and strong. And then you have like the Ishizu support, like Keldo, Mudora, Kelbeck, and Agito, right? Even though they're way too strong for the current game, and they totally deserve to be limited. But in a world without Tearlaments, they are a super generic set of cards that can be splashed into any engine that mills to the graveyard naturally, right? There are a lot of things wrong with the Ishizu support as far as like how powerful they are, at least in this current state of the game. But nevertheless, I do think that objectively they have good design. A good part of their design is how they can be put into so many decks and give other archetypes more tools to fight against stronger decks like Tearlaments, right? And then finally we come to Bestials. Bestials, even if they hurt the archetypes I like, right, which are Sky Strikers and Tearlaments, I think they are good for the game. And I'll tell you why. Because they elevate not just like the branded archetype, but they also elevate dragons. Bestial Magma Nut, for example, right? When he's special summoned, at the end phase, you could add any one dragon monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. That's pretty nuts, right? And any dragon deck could use this. Most notably, Dragon Link uses this the most. They're the best users of Bestials because they can very easily fulfill Druid's Worm's condition. Bestials are really nice for dragons. They are also obviously able to be used in a lot of other decks, right? Because they're so rather splashable, right? And they are very effective against the strongest deck, which is Tears. So with these archetypes, Konami is clearly able to maintain their power creep pattern, right? Which allow for them to continue to print money and continue to sell boxes. But also they are appealing to the older and casual player bases too, by making older cards extremely relevant. Madolche, for example, that was my first deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! And they were introduced back in 2012. Frogs have been in the game since forever, but a lot of the cards used in sprites are like from 2009, right? You see like Swap Frog here came from like 2009. And dragons have existed since the very beginning with Blue Eyes White Dragon, right? This aspect of archetypes that have come out recently are things that I want to see moving forward in the upcoming sets that I think is part of good design. Another aspect I think makes for good design, and this is where it gets a little controversial. Okay, this is where it's going to get a little controversial here. But another aspect that I think makes for good design is allowing for more player decision making. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I think gameplay design for archetypes like Tearlaments, Bestials, and the Ishizu support are hallmark examples of good gameplay design. Let me actually get Tearlaments over here. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? Tearlaments, notoriously powerful tier 0 archetype. Bestials and Ishizu support are horrible to play against for graveyard dependent decks, right? But while all of this is true, what all these cards do and create are fun and dynamic two-sided decision making, I think. Now, I'm going to do my best to sum it all up in a nutshell rather than go into insane detail just for the sake of this video. But Tearlaments alongside Ishizu create a very active and dynamic mirror match that constantly asks both players whether it is a good decision or not to mill right now, right? If summoning Havness is worth turning off key cards like Impermanence or Evenly Matched, what and most importantly, when do you shuffle cards back with Mudora and Keldo, and skillfully, how could you bait all of these actions, right? There are many more, and I'm no pro by any means, so there's probably a lot more, but those are just a few of them. Tearlaments and Ishizu cards, because of how crazy they are, they create a whole other level of interactability and player activity that I've never seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Before, to be frank. And when you create this much interaction points and questions for players to answer, you allow for more skill expression. You're rewarding players for learning and truly understanding the game. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very deep, very complex game. They have way too many steps. You could argue that it's way too convoluted. With all that power comes also the ability to screw up. And when there are meaningful consequences, when there are meaningful consequences to your actions, you create a more rich and dynamic game. But because they're so powerful right now, that level is just way too far removed from the rest of the decks, and thus it creates a tier 0 format. And while I don't personally hate it, it's certainly not a good thing, right? It's not a good thing to have a tier 0 format for most of the player base. Bestials are, or at least were, going to be generic counter support, not even just for Dragon Links or whatever, but for every other deck to fight back against Tearlaments. They were designed to give other players that ability to interact on that level. If you don't know what Bestials do, first of all, watch my video of me learning them. But imagine having a DD Crow with a big dragon body. That's 2500, 2000 defense, right? And also it just gives you a +1 at the end of your turn. That's ridiculous, right? That level of power in the hands of every other deck is genuinely a good thing because it lets them fight against the best deck. And while I love Tearlaments, I can't say it's a bad thing for the game for other decks to have more ability to play, right? That said, do not mistake me for gushing over the design of these cards as me wanting them to be banned or limited or even unlimited, whatever. As much as I like these cards for what they add to the game, I also think that they are way too ahead of their time. Of course, that's intentional in order to sell cards, right? But since Yu-Gi-Oh's only standard mode of play is an evergreen format where cards, since its release, are playable, of course, it's going to be a shame when the amount of cards that are considered competitive enough is just such a small subset of what is actually available, right? The point I'm trying to make with all this, though, is that what Yu-Gi-Oh needs most is for more archetypes to have these type of cards, right? To have cards like Bestials, to have cards like Mudora, right? And have cards like Tearlaments, like Havness being able to interact in hand, right? They need to have more of these type of cards in for the older archetypes. If more decks have these type of cards that allow for so much player input and decision making, then we would have a more diverse meta. The problem with Tearlaments and Bestials isn't that they're too powerful, but that other decks don't have the tools to fight them. And yes, I know they're the same thing in essence, but what I'm trying to say is that the better solution is to give other archetypes more tools. For now, the easiest answer is to reduce them with the ban list, of course, but the better answer is to create more archetypes like Vernisylph, right? Like Bestial, right? That allow older archetypes to play at their level. And that's my whole point of what I'm trying to make with what I think is good design and what I think we'd like to see more from Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, this part is not going to be as long, so maybe I'll elaborate on a different video, who knows, but what I want to talk about very briefly is what I think is clearly bad design in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And I feel like the elephant in the room is obviously Kashtira. Kashtira is not out in Master Duel yet, but they're just around the corner. And for those who don't know, basically they are a very oppressive deck in the current TCG format that can respond to their opponent's monster effects with their quick effects, which will banish opposing cards on the board from their opponent's deck, and also from the opponent's extra deck face down, which basically makes them unrecoverable for anyone that isn't Kashtira, right? As well, the biggest offender of them all, in my opinion, is Arise Heart. Arise Heart has an effect that makes any card sent to the graveyard banished instead, so pretty much think a Macrocosmos effect on a monster. On top of this, he has a quick effective ability to target and banish any card on the field face down. So while Kashtira is probably one of the more generic archetypes, given that they have such an easy summoning condition and Fenrir can search itself, right? So generic archetypes, good. Cards that you can splash into other archetypes, great, right? But I feel like the biggest reason why Kashtira is an example of bad design is rooted in Arise Heart. Because Arise Heart, in essence, is a floodgate from the extra deck, and one of the most oppressive ones at that. He is currently the best engine supporting him, and thus he is able to automatically shut down way too many decks. He's super easily accessible turn 1, and because of all of this, he demands an answer. That's why you see decks that aren't Kashtira run 3 Ash Blossoms, 3 Droll Lockbirds, 3 Nibirus, and 3 Ghost Ogres, and 3 Kaijus, right? Not necessarily all of these options, but because he's so oppressive and easily accessible, the current TCG meta can be boiled down to a single question: did you draw the out? And if the answer is no, then the game is lost. While if the answer is yes, you've practically won the game. So this kind of huge swing in results on just something that is based entirely on luck is something I think is horrible for the game. I think it's not fun. Because of this, a lot of decks can actually be playable, right? Super Heavy Samurai, Purely, Eldritch, Labyrinth. You actually do see quite a bit of different decks. Tier 0, when Tearlaments were out, you only saw Tearlaments. In this format, you do see more decks. They all can sort of play in this format, but the main reason they are winning is because of these blowout cards, and not necessarily because of the decks themselves. So when you have a meta that boils down to such swingy game states, where little decision making is involved, and the game is very dependent on getting lucky and drawing the right hand for your coin flip, you have very little room for skill expression, and thus a very stale and unfun game. There are plenty of videos out there that you can watch from creators like MBT or Yasin, I think that's how you say his name, sorry if it's not, who actively play in TCG that can tell you about this. So go watch their videos if you don't want to just take my word for it for whatever reason. But in summary, I think when you introduce super powerful archetypes that prohibit play instead of create interesting and active game states, it creates very stale metas, regardless of how diverse they are. Now, that's my piece, right? So let me go ahead and read chat. That was a whole script. Let me go ahead and read chat now, okay? Kashtira is just bad design. Macrocosmos on legs. You must run multiple Zeus to have a chance. Oh, yeah. When this card declares an attack or if your opponent activates a monster effect, you can look at your opponent's extra deck, and if you do, banish one monster from it face down. That's stupid. That's just dumb. And with Diablosis, he was banned very recently. He is also a card that looks at your opponent's extra deck and banishes one monster from it face down. And I don't know if there's another one, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, but these two cards are just so incredibly toxic. They basically require and hurt you in a non-gameplay sense, in a meta way, right? Because Zeus is a really good out to Kashtira plays. With Unicorn and Diablosis, you have to play more than one. And it sounds confusing if you only come from Master Duel, because Zeus, I think, is limited to one, right? I'm pretty sure. But in TCG, you can have more. And like having to play multiple of your boss monsters is kind of silly, right? It clogs up your extra deck and limits deck variety, but also hurts your wallet. It hurts your wallet. So I think that is really bad. We have a Rise Our Home, Shen Shusha Pass. I feel like the thing about Virtual World versus Kashtira is that Kashtira is just such a ridiculous engine. With Virtual World, it's not one card starters. They have to have another monster in their hand, and preferably something they can normal summon. Kashtira has one card combos. Virtual World has no true one card combo. That's true. Yeah. Virtual world is at least bricky. Exactly. So yeah, those are my thoughts on design in Yu-Gi-Oh! This will be uploaded here on this channel. So to anyone watching this, I would love to get your guys' input on this. So let me know what you guys think is good Yu-Gi-Oh! Design, what is bad Yu-Gi-Oh! Design, where you want the game to go. Let me know down in the comments. Also, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. It'd help me out a lot, and you'll also be able to see more. So thanks a lot again. My name is Rednu. I'll see y'all next time.